Hey everyone, this is Michael Cole. I'm VP of Marketing at Everflow, and today I'm joined by Sven of 24 Metrics. Sven, can you give a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael, for having me. So I'm the founder of 24 Metrics. So my background is actually I haven't actually started in fraud detection. I started in e-commerce, then I worked for a network, worked on advertiser side, and over the time, right, I did a lot of media buying for CPM, CPC, but also taking care of the affiliate. And yeah, I mean, we were working especially maybe the first touching points I had with this topic was in 2011, around that time, when I was working at a game advertiser, and we were looking at ROIs, right? We were looking like pretty much the same what people do it today, looking at sources, which one's profitable, which one's not. And we're looking at this and I was like, how come like some sources are so much more profitable than other ones, right? And we were like, back in the day, we had no idea about fraud detection at all. We didn't know anything about this. And we didn't have any other data, like not like today we're recording like user agent, IP addresses, all these kind of things, devices. We didn't have any of that. Our statistics system didn't show any of this. We just saw like there's a conversion and that was it, yeah. But one day, out of curiosity, we requested the log files and it's okay, well, they're all the same email addresses, really similar, right? VPNs and that kind of stuff. And that was really an eye opener back in the day, yeah. But when we started looking into that, we also saw like a very big differences between some people spend a lot of money, some people spend less money. And when I started my own network back in the day, so then I thought, okay, we were running like lead campaigns, right, for games back in the day. Maybe we were touching on the first mobile CPI campaigns, but that was really early stage for us. And of course, we had the problem that a lot of networks have, right? We really tried our very best to get quality in. We got it from different publishers, but we had to face two fronts, right? We had to do advertisers, make them happy, but also get the publishers, yeah. And that was a real challenge. And some of it, okay, this guy is starting, we were really happy. And then just 2 weeks later, the advertiser says it's all fraud. And so we naturally said, okay, we gotta have to do something about that. We need to kind of predict if a source is bad or when a source is good, right? Because like if one bad guy can ruin us the whole relationship with one advertiser, that's horrible, right? So we started digging into this, and well, very quickly we found like these patterns, like on user agents, the same device, same IP address, proxies, right? And we started doing that manually, and we were very busy doing that. Yeah. And then well, it was okay. It kind of works. We could predict it, yeah, but it was very time consuming. And we could do that at 2 or 3 sources, but if you have hundreds, that's really, really difficult. Yeah. But when actually I left in that business, so we sold that network. But after that, we're still thinking like, okay, what we do now, right? Like, what's the next thing? Where are we gonna go? And it kind of came like we spun around various ideas what to do. But one of the ideas were actually, why not go into fraud detection? Because we've tried fraud solutions out there before for our own network. We didn't really like it, yeah, because they were not built really from a marketing perspective. They were really not like built like on sub ID level granularity, the kind of stuff that we needed. They showed us things in a different way. So it's okay, well, maybe these things, there is something that we could really add a lot of value. And that's when we said, okay, well, we're starting a prototype, and we started coding in beginning of 2014. It took us about 2 years to finish. And then we actually started like really like getting traction in 2015. And then the mobile CPI, that gave us a big push. So we got a lot of clients then from mobile CPI. We also did the lead generation, of course, but mobile CPI became a big thing for us. And yeah, it kind of grew from there. So from a very small team down to a much bigger team now. And And now we're also progressing now into new areas like click fraud prevention. So it has evolved a lot from the very beginnings. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I think it'll be really interesting to explore sort of like the consequences of iOS 14 and a lot of just for context for people watching this, like iOS 14, the reason it's talked about as like this big deal is that with iOS 14, they were removing the concept of device ID. That has been delayed till 2021. So it was a big deal that iOS 14 was coming out. And then you might have not heard of it since then, because this is the biggest change. We'll talk about what this means later on, but that's sort of the context, is that even though iOS 14 has already happened, the biggest consequence and change of iOS 14 is coming in 2021. So we're going to be talking about that today and SKAdNetwork. So Sven, from your side, what are your thoughts on SKAdNetwork and iOS 14? And can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously, like iOS 14 is going to be a big change, right? Apple introduced that. We got a lot of questions from our clients. Yeah, what is that impact going to be on, especially on fraud detection, right? So it is going to be a big change. We know that there are going to be limitations on the tracking. Apple is introducing that for privacy reasons. Maybe from a generic point of view, like we in affiliate marketing, we're not maybe typically abusing it that much, right? Like we're not typically doing retargeting or privacy consent data. We're using IDFAs for tracking purposes only, maybe track some events, payments, activities, but we don't actually typically do that for user profiling. Other industries do that, but in affiliate, we actually typically don't do that. But as a side effect, we're going to be affected by this, yeah. So obviously, that's going to be a big impact also on us, how attribution is being done, what is fraud detection. And it has some consequences on fraud detection that we maybe, that we definitely gonna touch on, like click spamming, or how we look at CTITs, they're gonna be affected. So yeah, I believe it is a big change, but we've seen big changes as well in 2019 and 2018, 2019. The industry has changed a lot as well. So it keeps going doing this, yeah. So it's gonna be, looks like it's gonna be an exciting 2021, yeah.
It's definitely gonna shift some stuff. So some quick definition. So IDFA is a device ID. So it's basically the advertising ID for every single mobile device in Apple. And there's an equivalent for that in Android devices called the Google Ad ID. So traditionally, the way app tracking is done is that as the user goes through the click funnel to get to the App Store, the last stage is that they go through the MMP, which is like the internal tracking attribution for an app. It's a third-party company that provides this. So the user gets to that redirection chain. They go to the MMP. The MMP checks the device ID and then uses that for attribution, and then that user is sent to the Apple Store. So it's been a core piece of how attribution has been working up to this point, and the fact that it might disappear makes a ton of differences in terms of how all of these relationships work and how setups are done. Sven, from your side, have you seen any like stats on like how much traffic is really passing IDFA normally?
Yeah, so what we see like typically is 80% of the traffic is being used with IDFAs. Yeah, it's like also Apple has, they have already introduced, I think in iOS 10 a while ago, they limited ad tracking, I think they call that. So that's basically the kind of thing when a user doesn't want that, and then IDFA wouldn't be sent, yeah. But in still 80% of the cases, we are still seeing an IDFA. So it's not been a problem for us, really, So in almost all the cases there. But now it's probably going to be more the reverse, yeah. So that's going to change. Yeah, we may see big drops off probably. Definitely, for sure, it's going to be less IDFAs in the future, yeah.
Yeah, the early experts and stuff that were analyzing it. So basically, what the change is that rather than just being able to collect IDFA, like in the future, that information cannot be collected until the user opts in specifically to allow like advertising tracking of that device ID. And a lot of the experts are saying that only 10 to 15% of people are probably going to do this. So like it could be as much as like going from 80% of IDFAs being passed to 10 to 15%. Like there's a massive drop off, and it really that's why we're saying that IDFA is probably not going to be a reliable method, because like you can't afford to have 80 to 85% of your users leak out if you're using device ID as your only attribution method.
Absolutely.
So on that, without IDFA, like can't they just track through fingerprinting? Like what are your thoughts
Um,
on fingerprinting as an attribution method?
yeah. I mean, fingerprint has been around for a while, yeah. So that's nothing new. Uh, well, the fingerprint is something that isn't really unique, yeah. So when you have that, that's actually a combination of user data, like the device, the user agent. It may collect other things as well, like language, etc. But especially on iOS, a lot of people have the same configuration. Yeah. So fingerprinting does not really work that well. You can maybe if the fingerprint happened really like 5 minutes ago,
Mhm.
then we can more accurately track that and say this was that user that caused this, and we can attribute and maybe probably correctly with a high probability that this was actually the user. But if we say that was like happened a day ago, a week ago, right, we cannot do that anymore. We're going to get a high inaccuracies, and it might lead to a lot of weird stuff. Yeah, so weird stuff in speaking of like suddenly a network may affiliate gets attributed conversions that he actually never did. So suddenly like he gets organic traffic attributed to himself, or his
Mhm.
traffic gets attributed somewhere else, right? So it can get all mixed up. And I guess we will have to see with time to find the right mix, how long we can look back. But I think the look back time, that's definitely going to be very crucial. Right? We definitely won't be able to go back so much back in time as we could before. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd love to hop into that in a second. But one other thing to mention on fingerprinting is that um, a lot of the experts have been saying is that Apple does not particularly like fingerprinting.
Mm.
Um, Technically, it's not allowed at all, but then there's lots of it's a very much a gray zone where Apple like just looks the other way, but they're not really happy with it. And it's been funny that a lot of the MMPs have been like, yeah, we've upgraded to probabilistic tracking. We don't use the fingerprinting attribution word anymore, but I mean it's still just an improved version of the same thing. So now it's called like probabilistic attribution, but it's just an improved fingerprinting with more metrics being collected. So going back to what you mentioned, you were talking about how this whole SKAdNetwork thing is changing like postback windows. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so iOS 14, they're gonna introduce something that they actually gonna randomly fire the post back to the advertiser um, within 24 hours. So basically nobody's gonna know what was the real CTIT at that time, right? It could be the average CTIT that we see is about 2.5 minutes. Yeah, that's where
Mhm.
we see most of the people installing on normal traffic. But
Before
when that,
you go further, just explanatory comma on this. So
yeah, so
CTIT, also known as MTTI, in Everflow we call it click to conversion rate. But basically, this is the window from like when they click the ad to the time that they did the first conversion, whether that's like the app install, etc. So you can also do this for events, but usually it starts with like the install. So that's it.
yeah,
Continue.
yeah. So exactly. So typically like this time from click to conversion, it takes about 2.5 minutes. That's where we see most of the installs happening. And now this being randomized between 24 hours, what does that mean? We're probably going to end up at an average of like around 24 hours, right? So, well, 12 hours actually. That's where the average is going to lie in. And we're going to have a random distribution between 0 and 24 hours. which basically in today's detection, well, that's going to have a lot of click spam detection today. Ours and also others from the MMPs rely today on CTIT analysis. And in that sense, if those filters are not being updated or not taking this into consideration, we might be flagging a lot of click spam here. So we have to take that into consideration that these metrics can drastically change, and we should all be prepared for these. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you give the quick explanation of like what is click spamming and what is
Yeah.
click injection and how the CTIT or MTTI relate to it?
Yeah, so absolutely. So the normal in a normal scenario, when you click on an ad, that's basically when the click happens. I click on the ad, I go to the App Store, and then I download the app and then I open it. Yeah, so that's the time from this click to the open of the app. That's the CTIT that we see. Now, on average, as I said before, we're going to look at from our own experience. We all know that takes about 2.5 minutes for most of us. Of course, that varies by network condition and etc. But on average, we know it's about 2.5 minutes. Now, with the click spamming, how that behaves is a click spammer would actually have a lot of clicks, as the word suggests. And what they do is they run in these clicks and they get basically tracked in all the tracking systems on the MMP side. And they're going to remember this IDFA. And they say, okay, we know this guy sent a click here. And if these users actually, and that works really like, especially on very popular app and very big apps, yeah. If you would take something like Zynga or something extremely or Zoom or something like this, these kind of things that are extremely popular right now. A lot of people are going to the App Store and installing them anyways. But if someone has previously been tagged by having a click within the last 24 hours, then they actually this conversion actually does not be attributed to the organic traffic, but actually gets attributed to the affiliate. Then if you look at it, if you're just running some numbers, and if you're sending, let's say, 1 million clicks per day, and you're tagging 1 million people per day, just that don't even interested in the product, but some of them will basically download this app. It is the same situation if you're on a big square and you're tagging 1 million people, everybody who walks down, and you just tag them, and some of these people will walk into the store, even though they didn't even care about your advertising. Yeah, and that's exactly how click spam works. And it really only works basically on really large apps. If you have an app that has only 100 users, it won't work. Yeah, so it only works on these really, really popular apps. The more popular the app is, and the more users it has, the more prone it is to click spam.
So on that, is click spamming even possible under the SKAdNetwork setup? So with SKAdNetwork, there's lots of complications to it, but the easiest way to see it is that, like, if I own, say, an app that just reviews other apps, like it goes from my ad on the review app straight to the Apple Store for, say, Candy Crush, if I'm promoting Candy Crush. That is the entire like relationship. It's not like in traditional tracking, like that ad that's clicked on my review app would then redirect to, say, an ad network, and then redirect from the ad network to the MMP, and then redirect from the MMP to the App Store, and all of them are collecting data. And with SKAdNetwork, instead, it's going from review app straight to SKAdNetwork, or review app straight to the Apple Store. And then all other data outside of that has to be passed via server-side click in the back end, which is basically firing 2 clicks in parallel. So the user goes straight to the App Store, and then the parallel data is being passed to Everflow or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, did you have something to mention on that?
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So that's a very technical question. Yeah. So if there's an attribution window, which I believe it will still exist, then yes, yeah. So then it will work. It's just a question of how it's being implemented. So a browser can potentially remember something, yeah, like a cookie or something like that it remembers where it initially came from. That could be read from the App Store again, yeah. because not having any attribution window is also something that publishers or everybody in marketing would not like. Yeah. So I believe it will still exist. Yeah, it will still work. But yeah, I mean, it may even increase, right? It might, things may make it easier with SKAdNetwork for certain things. I believe as long as there's an attribution window, and if that still exists under iOS 14 under SKAdNetwork, then it will also be prone to click spamming.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect explanation. Like, depending on the attribution window, the longer the attribution window is, the more effective click spamming is. And because click spamming is all about just reaching as many users as cheaply as possible and then firing off the click tracker on every single one of them. So you're just covering a ton of people with this tracking. And then anyone who organically installs, say like an app like Starbucks, where people are always installing it, you just need to cover enough people and you're still a bunch of the organic installs that would have happened anyway. So depending on what is going to be the attribution window in SKAdNetwork, this is either going to be a serious problem or a lot of promotions are going to change, because if there's no attribution window, that most current promotions have to be adjusted to be driving that user once, because most people will click on ad, get to the app store and not immediately install. Like a lot of times, like they'll leave it for a while, they'll wander off, they'll come back to their phone, and at that point then they'll install. Like that's a pretty normal user thing. Like most happen within like the first, it's been a while since I've seen it. I think most users install in like the first 5 minutes. Do you remember what is like the normal like time to install window for the vast majority of normal users?
So we see like typically we see like 90% in the first hour.
Yeah. But even then, an hour is a long time. So if the attribution window doesn't include that, that really disrupts stuff. So when you're thinking about how to adjust to 2021, and if more advertisers start using the SKAdNetwork methodology, this is going to be something to pay attention to, because attribution window is one of the most important things to understand if you can keep doing business as usual. Cool. So can you talk a little bit about like how data granularity is going to be handled going into 2021 on iOS?
So yeah, we all know like Apple is going to limit it to 100 campaigns, yeah, at the moment. So that seems to me very strict, to be fair. Yeah, I believe it's really a bit too small. Yeah.
Yeah. So from the research we've done on this, while it is limited to 100, you can make any amount of registrations. So you could just register like 30 accounts and each account has 100 under it. So while it is limiting and like extremely manual and tedious, there are ways around it.
Yeah, that is true. So we'll have to see if Apple is actually going to increase it. I don't think anything is set really in stone here. We've seen that Apple has pushed it out. Actually was supposed to launch in Q4 already. Then they pushed it out. I guess they heard a lot of pushback from their main developers. Yeah. So there obviously is a lot of pushback here. Apple is definitely considering it. They said 100 back in the day. It doesn't mean that we're going to end up at 100, right? We may be looking at 300, 500. We don't know yet. Yeah. So it doesn't maybe need to be really as tough as it appears to be right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also just like keep in mind with all this stuff, like the current proposal for what SKAdNetwork will be is very convoluted. And there's a lot of forces pushing for them to give clear roles. And so like we've spoken to a ton of clients, we've researched a lot and talked to a lot of experts, but even then, we've already built out on our side a beta infrastructure that handles all of the new parameters and makes it easy and accessible to use. But even then, like it's going to be a constant like learning and evolving. I'm sure it's the same on your side of like, as we get more data and like, as we see like what's the final version that they launch, like we'll all have to like adapt and evolve quickly as that starts to unroll.
Exactly. And just to add to this, yeah, like, because it has to be in the Apple's own interest that the Apple iOS ecosystem is flourishing. Yeah. So if Apple would be too tight on if they ended up to being too tight, what is going to happen? Like we can really expect that advertisers, okay, I'm losing a lot of money. I can't really attribute my marketing budget on the edge. Overall, I'm losing money. What they're going to do? They're going to push more of their traffic, more of their marketing budgets to Android. And this is something that Apple definitely doesn't want to have. Yeah. So, but I think at the end, we're going to find a compromise here. Yeah. Where we get privacy and the tracking and everything under one place here. Yeah.
Definitely. So it'll just be a learning experience for all of us, and it's why it's important that you have trusted partners that will be transparent about like what you need to do. Cool. So we have a question from the audience. So first off, Apple's definition of publisher and advertiser is very vast. Can you elaborate the importance of SKAdNetwork integrations for affiliate networks specifically? Do you have any thoughts on that, Sven?
So yeah, so I agree. It is very vast. It's very not very precise. Yeah, it could be by publisher. I think it's what they mean per publisher. They don't mean the sub ID, but sub ID hasn't been mentioned at all yet. Yeah. So to be honest, we don't know how Apple sees that. Maybe you have more information about this. Well, what's your take on that?
No, I think it's right. I think that the thing to keep in mind is with SKAdNetwork right now, it's very confusing because the advertiser signs up as an ad network and the publisher signs up as an ad network. So again, I think with that stuff, like there needs to be more guidance from Apple about exactly what these definitions are going to be and if there's any difference, because right now it's just like how far are you down the chain rather than like clearly defined. So I think that that's something that's still going to have more details come out. And then the other part of this question is like, what would be the consequences to those who are not integrated in terms of attribution and fraud detection? So I think that's like, sort of like, what are some of the consequences of attribution and fraud detection with this? And like, do you have to be a part of SKAdNetwork?
No, so we don't need to be part of SKAdNetwork. We get the data from partners like Everflow or from the MMP directly. So we don't need to be part of SKAdNetwork, but of course it has some implications. SKAdNetwork, we expect that click spam metrics, CTITs, will be different once SKAdNetwork launches in the version that we know at the moment. And we're also expecting like there are going to be more duplicate IPs because obviously we're going to have IDFAs used to be a wonderful way to weed out, sort out any duplicates. That will become a lot more difficult. So in return, we believe there are going to be a lot more duplicate IPs. And in the worst case, maybe in fraudsters going to start to abuse that actively to know, okay, we have some inaccuracy here. So we'll have to see how that is going to play out.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out. Like there's been companies for like half a decade now building specific anti-fraud solutions for fighting fraud on the iOS ecosystem. And in this setup, instead, the flow is going straight from publisher to app store and then passing the data on the side. So that means that Apple is now the only person in the middle for preventing fraud. And they haven't been doing that for the last 5 years. So there's probably going to be a lot of new types of fraud popping up there. Realistically, like I'm trying to explore with Sven on like the SKAdNetwork side, but I think it is important to keep in mind that even in 2021, you're really not going to have to worry about a lot of this stuff because most advertisers are not going to just be using SKAdNetwork right away. Like that's going to take a lot of time. And what the flow will most likely be is that like you're still passing data to the MMP, and then the MMP is handling all attribution through probabilistic attribution. So like in that situation, like you're not even worrying about the Apple postback, et cetera. MMP is still a source of truth, and it works the same way it always has, where you can just pass the click to the MMP and they collect the data and they tell you whether it's an install, and they're just doing prediction to say which one's a real install. Like a lot of this stuff only happens once an advertiser switches to using SKAdNetwork as their main attribution method, and they stop relying on the MMP as the attribution like provider, which is going to be a transition phase and it's not going to happen for quite some time. Cool. So have you seen anything from your side in terms of like what developers and publishers should be doing before these SKAdNetwork changes roll out?
Yeah, so that's obviously an interesting one. We get that asked from clients, if there's anything that we know what they should prepare. Obviously, honestly, it is difficult, right? Like we all, as we're discussing this here, we are still assuming what Apple's going to be, what's really going to happen in the end. I think obviously stay on touch with all these conversations, try to really prepare yourself, also have different plans for different scenarios, maybe like a tough one, less tough one, look at how to maybe build like an permission screen, right? This is a topic, how to make that, maybe have different versions. But
the
I would
permission
also
screen
say,
for asking for access to the device ID and
exactly,
my personal or user data.
Exactly. And then the other one, what I would definitely do and what I would recommend to anybody who owns an app and promotes that, I would definitely plan some resources in Q1 that is, okay, that my development team really can react very quickly to any changes that we may have, right? So if that happens, it may come a lot quicker than we predict. It may be suddenly Apple has just said Q1. We don't know exactly when in Q1. So when that happens, we may only have a very short time to adapt to that. So we should account for that.
Yep. And one thing I'll mention there is for any Everflow clients, like you can always reach out to us. Like it's very important. And I'm sure it's the same on Sven's side, like for us to understand it as soon as possible by speaking to as many clients and understanding exactly like what challenges they're facing, like what they need to solve. So like feel free to always reach out to us because we're more than happy to help you. Like the more we learn, the faster, like we'll make sure that we're building everything that is needed to address this, like these changes as they start to actually become enforced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So kind of on what you were saying about asking for permission, do you think that the asking for consent potentially might have negative effects on retention or engagement?
So my take on that it won't, because I think we're already doing this. We all know that when I install an app, I get asked for notification permission, I get asked for location permission. It's just going to be one more thing. And I think at the end of the day, people are just going to tap, and then, they're in, which may also be, maybe at the moment we're looking at really low permission rates, but maybe at the end of the day, maybe people are just going, they don't care and they just accept, So maybe the acceptance rate will actually be higher than we actually initially expecting right now. Yeah.
For sure. Although I will mention the one thing to keep in mind there is like, even if that's the case, it'll be country specific, because I've heard that like Germany in particular tends to be very like privacy driven. So you're much more like what you're doing in the US is going to be even further from what you're doing for like reaching European countries. So just things to keep in mind. Let's see. So if ad networks are not able to link any conversion postback in SKAdNetwork to a specific user, how are they supposed to optimize campaigns using like the feedback from conversion events? Like, how do you see optimization working under this like SKAdNetwork infrastructure?
Well, that obviously gonna be that's the main challenge that we have here, right? But first of all, SKAdNetwork doesn't mean that there isn't any tracking at all, right? We still have SKAdNetwork still attributed. One of the problems gonna be is like you won't be able to, this exact user did this, maybe, but you just know, okay, we had X amount of installs from this source, right? We're gonna have some inaccuracy in it, but we're still gonna know more or less where things are coming from. So we're not gonna be completely blind, And there's another thing that we want that is worth mentioning, because whenever I listen to a lot of people get maybe under the impression that there aren't any IDFAs anymore with
Mhm.
iOS 14. Still a good amount of people, certain amount of people, yeah, it's a question of how many, but there will be people that are going to opt in to IDFA tracking, right? So we can still get real data as we have it today, just only on a percentage of those users. We can, of course, basically extrapolate those numbers, and you can say, okay, if 20% of those users have an ROI of this, I can assume that the remaining 80% are the same, right?
Mhm.
So we're able to do things like that, yeah. So it's not gonna be completely blind, but yeah, I think less in affiliate tracking. I think we're gonna be less affected by that, but I
Mhm.
think a lot more about retargeting campaigns and anything that's based on user profiling. In my opinion, they get hurt the most. Yeah.
Definitely. So we had a question in the chat. Um, do you think the way in which advertisers ask for the acceptance of the tracking might change opt-in rates?
Good question. To be honest, I'm not an expert on these kind of things. Yeah. So um, I think it can. Yeah. Like depends on how much Apple will give us the option to design that at all. Yeah. This permission. Um, the question may have a good impact. Yeah. If you maybe phrase it in a different way, that can definitely give it an uplift. Um, yeah, so I think it's definitely worth playing around. Maybe if you can do any A/B tests or anything like that, that would be definitely a good idea to do.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. So I think this is an interesting thing to sort of explore a bit. So how do you see the effect on payouts changing based on like these adjustments to like the granularity with, I mean, if we're losing the ability to really understand the user, like the full like conversion to event flow, like how does that affect like payouts in your perspective?
Yeah, so that's also one of the questions we get asked often. Yeah, like in my opinion, like if we're not able to really attribute a conversion accurately, yeah, I think they're going to have most impact on the CPM campaigns. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think that's really going to impact them there. So on that side, if CPM campaigns are less profitable because of loss of accuracy, then that may be good for us in affiliate marketing because maybe more budget will flow to affiliate marketing. Now, at the same side, we may have less conversions being attributed to the affiliate. If that's the case, there is obviously one thing that advertisers can do. They can compensate. If I'm low, I'm losing 20% of installs here. I can simply offset it with 20% payout increase. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it will be the same. So in that case, I would expect like a drop on the CPMs and an increase on the CPI.
Makes sense. And let's take a break from the whole SKAdNetwork thing for a second. Can you just give like sort of like from your perspective in the last few years, like what have been like the most common types of mobile fraud, um, and sort of like what should people know and be watching out for of fraud that already exists? Because like the knowledge of this is going to really be important as things shift. It's going to open up new revenue for fraudsters. So it's important to understand like what is happening now so you can prepare as new things pop up in the future.
Yeah.
So if you could
So
go through like what are the most common types of mobile fraud and like what should people think about them?
yeah, so absolutely. So our top mobile fraud is still click spamming. So that is still really, we see that still on a daily basis. That's still very present. So it hasn't really changed. We saw a big uptake in 2016, 2017 really became a click spamming as a big issue. But even in 2020 now, we still see that as our top number one reason.
Yeah, I
But
want to mention one thing on click spamming too. So the other thing to keep in mind of click spamming is that because it's stealing from organic installs that would have happened, those are typically very high quality users because they just wanted to install the app because they wanted to use it. So the why click spamming is so challenging is the fact that the users that are coming through click spamming look amazing. So the quality is fantastic, and you might think this publisher is really great, but really they're just stealing stuff that would have come anyway. So that's the other part of ClickSpanning. It's not just they're covering a ton of people; it's that the people that organically install are your best users. So
Yeah.
you might mistake the publisher to be high quality when really they're just a fraudster.
Yeah,
So
absolutely,
continue.
absolutely. So couldn't totally agree with that. Yeah, and of course, like when we first saw ClickSpam, maybe in 2017, a lot of advertisers, they were actually like, wow, we're getting really quality. These are one of my best sources, right? Sure, they have a very low CTIT, but yeah, very long CTIT, very low conversion rate. But these users are the most profitable users that we have. So they were very hesitant at the beginning to stop these sources. But when you really understand the technology behind it, how this is actually being done, and if you're interested, you can also read that on our blog. Yeah, we have articles around that, so to explain how click spamming is done in detail. Then you realize that they're just basically stealing organic users. And then it's no surprise, because organic users, they are often very into the game or very into the app. They come to the app store, they're referred by a friend, and then of course they have a better engagement than a regular normal user, that may come from another marketing campaign. So yeah, so maybe that's the top number one reason. But second reason is like we still see a lot of duplicate IPs. It varies by the countries, right? So that's also something. And we always look at only like we only look back a certain amount of time. By default, we're looking at only 24 hours back. We know that IPs are not unique. We know they recycle, but they don't recycle 30 times a day from the same offer, right? That's not happening. That's just that doesn't happen anywhere in the country, right? Anywhere in the world. So that's just pure fraud, and that should be flagged and not paid. Other than that, we still see like a very short click to install times. So like we call them session times. So like where like you see like an install happening at 5 seconds, you can't simply install from click to opening the app. You can't do that in 5 seconds, yeah. So that doesn't happen, and we flagged it as well, and it's not it's fraud. And then the third one is proxies and VPNs, still an issue. Yeah. We know like people trying to be smarter around it. Some people start using residential VPNs, but there are also ways to detect those, but they are very expensive. We see a lot of things from servers, right? Like Alibaba, Amazon, DigitalOcean, these kind of server providers. We see a lot of traffic from there still. And we actually have really interestingly, we have done an analysis with a client of ours around the profitability around these VPNs, because sometimes the question is, how profitable are these users, right? Are they actually spending money? And we actually analyzed them by the ISP, and we looked at data from the United States, and we saw like a sharp drop-offs, especially where we saw like there was some engagement on like signups or tutorials or 3-day activity, but when they really dropped off was on the payment. So, and that was the interesting part. Apparently there are bots playing these, taking engagement. Some of them even had higher engagement than normal ISPs in comparison, but on the payment they performed extremely poorly. So that was really very interesting insight to look at it when you say, okay, there's activity going on, goals they're reaching, but when it comes to paying, you will see extremely very little ones, that very few that reach these goals. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great primer. So I think that's a great point to shift into sort of future facing of like what comes next. So let's start with a question from the audience, because I think that fits in it. So it says, what do you think will be the effects for fraud prevention done within CPA networks? Like with all these SKAdNetwork things, like what is it going to look like in terms of like what the ad networks are doing for fraud prevention on their side? Well, actually, I guess it's CPA specific. So how does this affect like CPA oriented ad networks with fraud prevention?
Yeah, I mean, like, so if I understand the question correctly, If you can prevent, obviously there's a lot more, the industry is moving towards prevention. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we don't only want to detect, yeah, we want to stop the fraud before it happens. If we can do that, then it's going to be a lot easier for the advertiser, but also for the networks, right? Uh, to stop these kind of things. I'm not sure if there's a bigger difference between CPI and CPA. Like, of course, if people pay per action, per payment only, yeah, if you pay per engagement or something like that, that will be harder to fake. Obviously, we know that. If you only move to payments, but that is not attractive to a lot of publishers. We know that as well. So I believe the most popular model will remain the CPI model, even though the cost per engagement or CPA obviously it seems to be more attractive from an advertiser point of view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of interesting changes in the horizon. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna have to figure out how anti-fraud looks in the future, because like if the user's going straight to Apple, and then Apple's just sending postbacks without having like a full understanding of fraud prevention, like it's going to be a lot more about how the parallel data is being processed by companies like 24 Metrics and Everflow to
Yes.
make sure that there is a second source of truth that's saying like, yes, Apple says there's 100 installs, but really there should have been 50 installs, and we
Yeah.
blocked these other placements for this reason.
I mean, this is a very interesting point, and we also have been discussing that in the team here. So if we had like no really good tracking anymore on this, we also have a product called Click Shield, and we actually blocking things on a click level. We screening things on a click level. So in that regards, we know that CTITs, long CTITs and click spam are associated with a lot of clicks. Yeah, so extremely low conversion rates, high click spikes. We see things like, I don't know, massive duplicate IPs. So we have patterns that are indicative to click spam. So even though if we can't prove that, if we would not have this data on a conversion level anymore, we know how these patterns look also on a click level. We can say, if you have a conversion rate lower than 0.5% or something like that, then simply that then the advertiser may consider as simply as click spam, even if the data is not available. Or if you're having massive click spikes, then that's something that they would say that gotta be bad traffic. They would consider that as click spam, even though they don't have the full data as CTIT analysis as they have today. And also not to forget, we are able to do still, like if you're still receiving 20 or 30% of the traffic with the IDFAs, where we can still run a CTIT analysis, we may be able to say, okay, if 30% of the traffic has been click spam, we can still say, okay, let's assume the other 70% of click traffic is also click spam. Yeah. So, and then to automatically block this source. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like I can see that it might look like probably by 2022, it's going to be a while for this, that the ad network's job is an interesting proactive one, because say you're receiving 1,000 postbacks from Apple, but only 500 of them are like actual good installs, and then you're figuring out that the other 500 look fraudulent. Like it's going to be up to the ad network to basically say like, hey, we blocked these 50 placements because we found them to be fraud. You should only pay us for 500. Like we're going to invoice you separately for the installs, because we know that even though Apple sent us these postbacks, they should not be credited. Like you're just going to have a lot more communication. From the Everflow perspective, it's one of the reasons like we're pretty bullish on SKAdNetwork, because like the most interesting thing about this is that it changes the dynamic a lot. Like the traffic source now has the most power in this situation, because the traffic source is the last point where you have like full data. So the traffic source is sending traffic straight to Apple. But if you control that traffic source, like you have access to that data first, and you can make smart decisions. You can work with your anti-fraud vendor, and you can look a lot better than your competition. So I do think that it does change it, because right now the MMP is the source of power, and under SKAdNetwork, the traffic is the source of power, because it's the one that has the data first. And so I think we'll see some very interesting changes for the ecosystem that could really benefit the ad networks and agencies of the world.
Absolutely. So we see that exactly the same. Yeah. So I couldn't agree more to that. That you still get on the click level, you still have, that's maybe the last point where you have 100% accurate data. And there are all these patterns from click spamming, right? That we know how they look, and we know how to look at them on a click level. So we know, okay, someone sends X amount of clicks, like I don't know, 5 million clicks a day, or something like that, and has very little conversions. Then we know something has to be wrong. That is really a typical click spam pattern. Yeah.
Do you have any exciting plans for sort of things that you're working on internally that you can reveal about how you're sort of thinking about these changes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have some really interesting things that we launched in our product ClickShield, especially around sub IDs. We know, like, that's also a problem with AppsFlyer. AppsFlyer also doesn't like that. When they see massive sub IDs, that is a problem. Like, if someone, we see people, we had people that had like 18 million sub IDs in a month. Yeah. And that's really big. Yeah. And when we actually looked at this data on a granular level, we saw that they're actually full of IDFAs. Yeah. So full of device IDs, and people doing that. Well, I guess this is not out of accident. This is on purpose, because they make analysis extremely hard, or even impossible. If you only have one conversion per sub ID, then if you're trying to calculate any engagement out of this, then you can't. So spreading that is, in my opinion, is a problem tactic. They actually, and you can limit that with us. Yeah, you can say the sub ID has to be in a specific format. It has to have a specific length. You can't have more than X amount of sub IDs on a click level. And so that's one thing we do. We also see like massive amount of, on the click level, massive amount of duplicate IPs, like actually much higher than I personally expected. Yeah. So sometimes we really see like things on a daily basis, like 100,000 times the same IP within 24 hours. Extremely bad. Also a lot of VPN traffic. Also, that was a surprise to look at that on a click level, because I think a lot of fraudsters in the past, they were kind of really knew that they would get away with it, sending fraud on the click level, hiding things like high conversion rates or low conversion rates, in the click bots and these kind of things. But since it's possible to actually analyze the click screen, look in for patterns and see them, like how often do IPs replicate and all that, that really reveals it then, and then they're not prepared for that. And it's going to be a challenge for them, because they can't get that many different IPs. They may change a different VPN, you can reset it, but you can't do that with like 1 million clicks. Yeah, you can't get a million IPs. So really simulating organic traffic on that scale is going to be really, really difficult, even if you run a bot, a machine there, if you have access to a lot of different IPs, but you won't have access to a million different IPs. Yeah, that's really hard to get by. So I think this is one of the things, yeah, we have. And for next year, what we are doing as well, we are going into machine learning. So we are actually building predictive models. So as I maybe mentioned before, like with the ISPs, we looked at some data in the States, and we saw very big differences between the ISPs in terms of profitability, even between non-VPNs. Obviously, VPN versus non-VPN, we see a big drop-off. But we also saw differences between T-Mobile and Verizon. And a very interesting learning was, one of the most profitable ISPs out there was Google Fiber. And Google Fiber is a gigabit. Google Fiber. So Google Fiber is like a gigabit network, very fast, very tech-savvy users to be there. They spend a lot of money. They are very tech-savvy. They probably have the latest smartphone and all that. And we are basically trying to mold that all into a ML model that says, okay, we know it's this user. We know on previous historic data that this ISP performs better. If it's a fresh device, for example, we have a higher probability that they turn into a paying user versus a VPN user, ISP from a VPN, and a very old device. Yeah. So if you take those two extremes, and then our model is going to do that in real time and can predict quality of those users.
Yeah, if you ever want to do a case study on that, that'd be super fascinating. I mean, I know that we track that data on our side, and there's lots of ad networks that would like to go back to their advertisers and agencies and be like, hey, turns out 10% of our traffic installs are coming from Google Fiber. Pay us more.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that a lot of people would be interested to learn more about that. Cool. So I wanted to mention something on the duplicate IP side, because that's very fascinating that you're seeing like it becoming more and more of a problem with duplicate IPs. Because from what I've seen with SKAdNetwork, I haven't seen any mention of how they handle duplicate IPs at all. And in that situation, what it means is it's really going to be up to the ad network and stuff to be handling this policing for themselves. And I'll just reiterate this one more of like how like we're seeing tracking working in terms of SKAdNetwork. So if the advertiser demands SKAdNetwork, so you're not using MMP anymore, the way it's going to be is your publisher is going to send traffic straight to the App Store. And then at the same time, that publisher is firing a server-side click. A server-side click is basically a parallel click. So it's firing traffic it's firing the user straight to the App Store, but it's firing the data about the user straight to Everflow. Or 24 metrics is 24 metrics involved in here. The reason this matters is that the user experience is great. They're going straight to the App Store. There's no delays. But the data around things like their IP and user agent, all that data is being passed by the server-side click straight to 24 metrics or Everflow. And that means that if we have that IP data or 24 metrics has that IP data, they can then make decisions about, oh, there's a lot of duplicate IPs, there's proxy IPs, stuff like that. Let's do something there. So I think that it's I haven't seen anything about how Apple's handling this. So it's just saying that you should be figuring out like, I need to have a process in place where I'm actually handling these IPs. Because if this is a common fraud thing, like you don't want to have to deal with 3 months later where advertisers finally realize that there's so much of this fraud going on and try and take back all of the money they paid you. You want to be proactive so that you can be ahead of any painful scrubbing. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I think a lot of things go back in the hands of the networks. Yeah. So I think to take on that, they're gonna need like a solid fraud prevention. Yeah, that they say, okay, we're gonna screen that. We're preventing our customers from fraud and being that transparent, right? Like being really, I think transparency is something that is extremely important in the industry, because being transparent with the advertiser is, I mean, they want to do more business with you. Yeah, if they trust you, if you share that, it's okay. Everybody is, I mean, like everybody has some sort of fraud, right? Even if you try the best in your best interest, you can always get a bad apple, right? And in that case, it's really important to build this trust relationship. And how do you build this trust relationship? By sharing data. Yeah. So example, like we can sync back the results to Everflow. So you can really see all the results, what we are screening. They can see that also in Everflow. And also, I guess in Everflow, you can also give access to the advertiser. Yep. They can see that. So it can be really 100% transparent and say, okay, we see that kind of fraud. So, and then we don't bill you for an IP that replicated 30 times in the last 12 hours. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And one thing we're doing at Everflow too is so we've added the ability to pass more postbacks to different sources. So with SKAdNetwork, when you receive that postback from Apple, you can then pass that postback to the MMP. So we're trying to do this thing where like all of these third-party solutions can all work together seamlessly, where each of them are providing value with their different expertise, because like we can never do anti-fraud as good as 24 metrics. Like that's not our focus. And the more that this becomes important, like the more you need to have trusted sources that are focusing on just stamping out like these like really pernicious styles of fraud. Because if they're making a ton of money, like there's going to be fraudsters.
Absolutely. So I think that's the way to go. Yeah. So we're gonna see how that's gonna play out next year, but yeah, I'm very, very, very excited. Yeah, so it's gonna be a big change, yeah, for sure, next year. So we had all these changes in the last year, so next year will be a big change again with SKAdNetwork. And just to mention at the end, right, like to also say, how is Google going to react to this? Yeah, so that's going to be a very interesting one as well. It's always said like Google will follow Apple
Yep.
in some way. That's what a lot of people are expecting. So if that's happening, then the industry will have really transitioned to to a different model, to a different way of working.
Definitely. Like that's when this becomes like essential. Right now we're in the transition phase where everything is about like figuring out the best way to handle stuff that's not well documented yet. So as it gets more documented and gets more understood, like uh, I'm sure both sides will adapt as quickly as possible to those like new findings. So thank you so much for your time. If someone wanted to learn more about 24 metrics or how to integrate you into their Everflow platform account, what's the best way to get involved with 24 metrics?
Yeah, so the best way is like you just go on our website, 24metrics.com. You can also write us to support@24metrics.com. We also have a blog if you want to read about how we do things. We have free trials for our products, so everybody can try it out. Also with the integration of Everflow, it's really easy and streamlined. Yeah. So anybody wants to give that a shot, we're really happy to have a call, also discuss about any of your findings with iOS 14, what's the feedback from your advertiser, if there's any news on that. We're always here to learn about that. So that's always great. And like the industry is evolving. So if we can help someone, even if they don't become a customer at the end, we're always interested to help people out and learn more about the industry.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sven. This is really great. It was great to get to mine your expertise and discuss this very complicated issue that the more we all learn, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, truly a pleasure.
Likewise. Have a wonderful day and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.